I'm going to be ministering on the thought on the other side of broken. In this life, I'm not going to ask who, not going to ask for a show of hands because every hand would go up. But in your life, has there been times or elements or happenings of brokenness? In every life, to one extent or another, at one time or another. And the question is not will we go through a struggle of being broken, but what will happen on the other side of broken. And I'm glad to report today, God has a plan. God has a purpose. And God has a way. I want to begin today by looking at one of the greatest creative miracles other than healing in the life of Jesus. John chapter 6. Jesus is ministering. And in verse 2, the Bible said, and a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. So why were they following Jesus? To see the miracles. What is this world looking for today? A miracle presenting powerful God. Sadly, that's not the God found in a lot of churches. That's not the point. The point is that a lot of churches across America that even to this day may not have a real spirit and presence of God in them are about to get a touch from heaven. See, God didn't give up on them. God just allowed them to give up on him for a while. But I believe in the name of Jesus Christ, every church in America that preaches the Word of God in Jesus Christ will be infused with a spirit power from above, and the miracle power of God will begin to manifest. And this world, the same world that followed Jesus for the miracles, will come into the house of the Lord, and they will sense the miracle power of God. The crowd came, and then in verse 5, as the events begin to unfold, when Jesus lifted up his eyes and he saw a great company coming to him, he said to Philip, where shall we get bread that these may eat? 5,000 men plus women and children. They had been with him all day long. The day was forespent. They were now hungry. And Jesus said, Philip was the general master in charge of all this stuff. He said, Philip, how are we going to feed him? And where did he come from? And Philip's looking around saying, well, and then he begins to think. And in the next verse, Jesus said, he said this to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. See, Philip looked around and said, well, we take all the money we got and we don't have enough to give him even so much as a sandwich. Jesus asked Philip, what are we going to do? Because Jesus knew what he would do. Do you believe today Jesus knows what he's going to do next? Do you believe God knows how he is going to unfold his plan and his kingdom in this world today? Hallelujah. I don't. You don't. They certainly don't know on CNN. I know that. Not a clue. But ladies and gentlemen, Jesus knew what he was going to do next, and God knows what he's going to do next. Jesus knows how he is going to unfold his will in this world. Jesus knew exactly what he will do in your life this day. Verse 7. Philip said, well, we've got 200 penny worth of bread. That wouldn't be enough. Lord, he stumbling and bumbling and mumbling and said, Lord, we don't have enough that they can even take a little bit. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, what you have is not sufficient. But what our Father has is all sufficient. And it is the will of the Father to present and implant into your spirit all of the sufficiency of heaven to accomplish everything God wants to accomplish in your life, your ministry, and your destiny. Philip saying, Lord, what we have isn't enough. I love verses 8 and 9. Okay. Here comes Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, and he said, Lord, I got an answer. I found something. There's a lad over here, and he's got 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. I got to believe at that moment, the other 11 disciples were looking at him and saying, huh? What is wrong with you, Andrew? And I do believe in that moment, he kind of looked in their eyes, and he's all excited, saying, there's a lad here which have 5 barley loaves and 2 small, but what are they among so many? I concur with you. That was a silly thought. Now, we're going to go on in a verse or two and see that Jesus didn't pay any attention to the detractors. But the thought here is, there is a lad here. This man of God, Andrew, found provision. Now, it did not seem like very much provision. Now, Jesus, hearing and observing all of this, was Jesus bothered by the limited amount of provision? No, of course not. But he was teaching his disciples as he was preparing to feed the multitude. There is a lad here, and I want you to know there will always be sufficient for the Father to perform his will. There will always be not, and I want you to notice this morning, when God comes to meet a need, God never has just enough. He always has more than enough, more than sufficient. And I am so thankful today that God has everything that we need. Verse 10, while the disciples are looking at Andrew with an odd look, Jesus said, just make the men sit down. There's a lot of grass in that place. The men sat down, about 5,000. Verse 11, then Jesus took the loaves and he had given thanks. He distributed to the disciples, and then the disciples took it out to them that were set down, and likewise of the fish. And how much was there? As much as they would. In other words, everyone was filled. Out of one lunch, 5,000 men, women, and children, thousands and thousands of people. And then in verse 12, after they had eaten, when they were filled, he said unto them, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. I wished I had time to stop right here and to preach on the thought that nothing be lost. I want you to know God will never lose one thing. Jesus will never lose one thing. He possesses this universe. And I am so saddened that a lot of people running around thinking, oh, Jesus might lose track of me. Oh, Jesus might not keep track of my, I might not get this and I might not get that. I want you to know God's never lost anything yet. And he's not going to start with the coronavirus. God has never lost anything yet. He brings sufficiency and provision. And he said, gather it up that nothing be lost. And then I love verse 13. Therefore they, who is the they? The 12 disciples. They gathered up them together and filled up 12 baskets. Where'd the baskets come from? No, I don't have a clue. I'm asking you. Where'd the baskets come from? Jesus always had everything he needed, and there were 12 baskets. And these weren't little Easter bunny baskets. These were big old bushel baskets. And they took these big baskets, 12 men went out, and they picked up the fragments of the food, and they brought back, which remained over and above to them that had eaten, each of the 12 carrying a basket. Why did Jesus have them do that? Jesus had just fed the multitude, but he wanted to teach his disciples something. And in verse 14, what happened? Then those men, the 12, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, and they were carrying back a basket that was full, they said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. Jesus came to reveal himself as the Messiah, the Son of God. And in this moment of miracle, Jesus allowed them to fill the baskets, and thus giving them a physical evidence that he was that prophet that should come. Jesus wants you to know this morning, he is the only Son of God. He is the only name given among men whereby we can be saved. He is the one and only true, eternal Son of God. And he chose not only to die, not only to resurrect, not only to ascend, but he also chose there will come a time that I'll come back. But he said, between now and then, I'm going to send you a comforter. And that comforter is our abiding presence today. Thank you, Brother Doug, for singing that song. Your presence is like heaven to me. Aren't we hungry for the sweet presence of the Lord? The purpose was that they would know who Jesus was. They recognized the Messiah. I want to now read a verse from Mark chapter 6, verse 41. This is an account of that same occurrence. And I want you to note precisely what Jesus did in a four-step pattern when he prepared to minister to these people. And when he had taken the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and brake the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and the 2 fishes divided he among them all. I want you to notice 4 words in that verse. The first word I want you to note is, and when he had taken. The first thing Jesus did was he took into his hands the lunch of that boy, the fish and the bread. He took, and then he blessed. The first thing Jesus did when provision was placed into his hand was he blessed. Then after he blessed, he brake the bread and the fish. And the fourth thing he did was he gave to the disciples, and they served the people. We have here in this one verse a capsule presentation of how God deals with the human spirit. Every one of us, born in sin, shaped in iniquity, lost, hopelessly lost. The first thing Jesus did was he found you and he took you. Aren't you glad you got took by Jesus? Aren't you thankful that one day he looked down and he called you by name and he said, I'm going to take you. And oh, do you remember those first days when you were accepted by the Lord? And then what did you, as soon as he takes us, what does he do? He just blesses us. How many knows it's sweet to live in the blessings of God? Woo-hoo. And then I've been taken. I've been blessed. Everything is good. And from here on out, it's going to be a bed of roses and everything is going to be wonderful. And then breaking comes to every person. Because God in his eternal plan, it's not about you. It's about him. We are the men and women of this earth that he is using to fulfill his will for the ages. I love that verse in Ephesians that says that in the ages to come, he's going to showcase us and show the universe, look what my grace has done. It's about his grace. It's about his kingdom. It's about his will. He takes you. He blesses you. And he breaks you. I know that when any kind of brokenness comes in this life, I know how grievous it is. You know how grievous it is. There's an old trite saying. You've got 2 choices. Get bitter or get better. There's a lot of truth in that. And the only way you get better is by acknowledging, Father, your will be done. Because after the taking, the blessing, and the breaking, there is a giving. And this morning, God desires that you present yourself to Him, wholly acceptable unto God, and say, Lord, I want to be given by you to someone else. And I can tell you by personal experience, I'm not going to relate it because I'd cry, but I can tell you, when you're broken beyond measure, in that moment it seems like there is no hope. But when time goes by and the healing virtue of Jesus Christ comes into your spirit, and there comes a day when you can look at someone else broken where you were, and you can speak a word, take a hand, have a prayer, and see God minister in them. I said to myself, Lord, never would I have volunteered for what happened to me, but in this moment, I'm thankful that your will for my life is unfolding before me. Ladies and gentlemen, God has something for each of us to do. And because we've been broken, God has this unique way that whatever the area of your brokenness, that's who God will bring you in contact with, so that you can minister not from a book, not from a teaching, not from a teacher, not from an instruction, but you can minister out of your own heart's experience. And you can truly say, I know what you're going through. And that ministers like nothing else. Now, this was an account of when he fed 5,000. He fed them bread and fish, and the purpose of that feeding was to sustain their hunger and to fill their stomachs. But there's another verses, and we're going now and looking at two accounts. One just before his crucifixion and one just after his crucifixion. Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be reading these verses a little later when we receive our communion together. But just before he was crucified, gathered the 12 together. They're in the upper room, what we commonly refer to as the Last Supper. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it. And what? Here's that same pattern again. He took, he blessed, he brake, and he gave to the disciples and said, take, eat. This is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, drink ye all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Let me read this next verse. For I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Isn't that a fascinating verse? I can follow, Brother Wayne, I can follow Jesus with the 12. I can follow the breaking of the bread. I can follow the drinking of the cup. But this, Jesus said, now, I want to tell you something. I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. That day's coming. Here's the amazing part. I'm going to be there. Here's the amazing part. You're going to be there. I remember a number of years ago, there was a well-known entertainer, and my wife wanted to go, so I heard about it. I called up, and as soon as I called up, all the tickets were gone, and the only thing they had in a 50,000-seat stadium was the nosebleed seats, and I got one. I want to tell you something about this event. There's no nosebleed seats. Every one of you are going to have a front row center seat. You say, how's God going to do that with a few 100 million of us? He'll work it out. But you're not going to be so far away you can't hardly figure out what's going on. You're going to be right there. Every one of you. Every child of God that's ever lived. I don't know what it's going to be when Jesus picks up that cup. And for the first time since before he was crucified, he touches his lips with the fruit of the vine. I believe there will be some shouting. I believe there will be some dancing. I believe there will be some hello. presence of the living God. That's what he promised he was going to do. That day is just ahead of us, and I look forward to it with all of my heart. First, in John chapter 6, Jesus fed 5,000 men plus women and children, filled their bellies with bread and fish. And now here, just before his crucifixion, he has just the 12. And this was not a meal of sustenance. This was a meal of communion. There was a purpose being accomplished here, explaining to them bread representing his body, the cup representing his blood. Then he was crucified. He rose again. And then one of my favorite accounts is in Luke 24. We're not going to take the time to go through the entire account, but you will remember that Jesus has now been crucified. He's resurrected, but his followers don't know it yet. And so there was a large number of them gathered in Jerusalem, and then two of them went the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was several miles outside of Jerusalem. It was 60 furlongs. And these two men walked along together, and they talked about all of these things which had happened. Okay? Then, about that time, in verse 15, as they were talking, and it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went up to them. Verse 16, they looked around, and the Bible said their eyes were holden, that they should not know him. So the two men, these were disciples, these were followers of Jesus and his earthly ministry, but they did not recognize him. They didn't know who he was. So then, let's look at the next verse. And they drew nigh into the village where they went, and he made as though he would have gone further. Now, what happened? From the moment Jesus walked up and said, "Hello, can I walk with you?" And they looked at him, and they did not recognize who it was, these two men on the road to Emmaus. And then they began to talk to him, and Jesus said, "What's all the excitement?" They said, "What? You haven't heard about this Jesus?" And they began to explain to Jesus what had happened. And they said, "Oh, we thought he was our prophet. We thought he was the Messiah from God. And then he was killed." And they outlined the whole thing. And you know what Jesus did? He just listened. And they said, "Are you from out of town or something? Everybody's heard about this." And Jesus just listened and said, "Really?" And he walked with them. And the Bible said, then Jesus began to open the scriptures to them. Ladies and gentlemen, the will of God today is to open the scriptures to your heart and to your spirit, to my heart, to my spirit. Thank God. He started with Moses and went all the way through the Old Testament. And after several hours of this walking, they came into where they went. And they said, "Well, would you like to come in and abide with us?" And Jesus said, "Sure." So they go in, and they sat down. And the Bible said, and it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, now here it is again, he took, he blessed, he brake, and he gave. And when Jesus broke the bread, when he gave it to them, something happened. Look at that next verse. And it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and brake it, and gave it to them. And the Bible said their eyes were opened. And they realized it was Jesus. Now, have you ever wondered exactly how is it that they knew in that moment it was Jesus? I don't know. There's not a record given, but I know this. If Jesus took bread, if he broke it and presented to them, what would they see? His hands, And what would they see in the hands of Jesus? The prints of the nails, and their eyes were opened. I love the rest of that verse. As soon as Jesus broke the bread, presented it to them, and as soon as their eyes were open, what did Jesus do? Go! The Bible said he vanished out of their sight. They looked at each other and said, did not our hearts burn within us? And they had a revelation. It was the Son of God. After Jesus took the bread, after Jesus blessed the bread, after Jesus broke the bread, he gave it to them, and their eyes were opened. Thank God. Now, I love the rest of the story. They ran back at night. When you shouldn't do it, it was dangerous. Made it back into Jerusalem. And they found the room where Mary and Martha and the 12, when they were all gathered in fear. And I love it. When they walked in, they said, he is risen indeed. Well, is not that the message this world still needs to hear today? He is risen indeed. And then, don't you love it, that they're all saying, well, what's going on around here? And I love Thomas. I don't know why we call him Doubting Thomas, but he just wanted to know that it was really Jesus. And so here's the 12 and some of the ladies and some of the people that followed him and the 2 men from Emmaus. And all of a sudden, guess who showed up? What? The same Jesus had just disappeared. Now, and the Bible said the door was shut. I mean, they were, and there was Jesus. He began to minister to them. I want you to know today, Jesus knows when to appear. Jesus knows precisely the moment that we are in the most desperate of need for him to show up in our life. And that's when he does it.